SFB Addict here, an idiot's guide to making a Vassal module, video 5. I had a bit of a brain fart when I was making video 2. I was starting to go through the map items. I showed you the very first item for the overview window, and then I started going back up and started doing all these other items. So video 2 was supposed to be only the main map and these items, and then that would have ended the video. But as I said, I got distracted and had a bit of a brain fart, and I started doing other things. Now I'm just opening up my Starfleet Battles module here because I've already got some map work done on that. I'll be bringing that over and showing it to you as I go through the list here. So let's go back to the map functions. So we did overview in video 2, and I meant to go to line of sight. So line of sight basically lets you draw a line on the map. It'll count out the range, and you can use it for judging line of sight for miniature games where that sort of thing will matter. So if you've got a tree or something blocking or intersecting with your line of sight, then you know that you can't see a unit that's directly behind it, that sort of thing. And as usual, you've got the top 3 items for anything that you make in Vassal, where it's the name, the button text, and the mouse over tooltip text. And then if it's got a button itself, you can select a graphic for it, or you can use the default graphic. And then, of course, there's a hotkey on the keyboard where you can do that instead of clicking the button. Then we have a report format. So this will show to the chat that player ID checked line of sight from where you start to where you finish. So if that was a hex board and you were checking the range from 101 to 104, it would say checked range from 101 to 104, and the range is. And then you got the ability to leave the line as persistent, never or always. And the button icon, one of line of sight is persisting. You can select a different graphic or no graphic. It can be visible to the opponent, when persisting, never or always. Force start of thread to snap to grid, so if you're using a hex, that would be the center of the hex. If you're using a square grid, it might be the intersections of the grid, etc. Force end of thread to snap to grid. Draw the range, that means it's actually going to draw the line, and gives you pixels per range unit, or you can use 0 for grid calculation, and then you can round your fractions up or down, and you can also hide your pieces when drawing, and then you can set your color. And let me just quickly open up here in the other window. I've got a dual monitor set up here. I'm only recording one of them. I'm going to set up a blank map and finish and finish. And I'll let that load up its map here for a second. Okay, so my map is loaded. So in the map tools, I've got that sector map, which gives you the little tiny square, and it can do that sometimes with the zoom factor. It can go off a little bit, but it'll usually a couple seconds later come back, and it gets better with your various zoom factors on your map. Different settings will give you different results. But anyway, it's not really what we meant to show you here. We want to show you the range line of sight. So you click on a hex and drag, and you get your range. And each time you do it, you got to go back in and select it again. So click, you got your range, let it go, and when you let it go, it echoes to chat. So that's your line of sight. Next item is add a toolbar menu, and that literally adds a button. and you can nest other items inside that button. So for instance, in the ADB one, when we went to Map Tools, that is a toolbar menu, and it nested inside of that two sub-items, the range line of sight and the sector map. So that would be the same thing here of going to toolbar menu and creating sector map and line of sight here as the two items. So that was toolbar. And then we have multi-action toolbar. Toolbar and multi-action toolbar function exactly the same, except in one respect. In the toolbar, each item that you create in here, when you click the button, you have to select on it individually and separately to execute. The multi-action button, as soon as you click on the button itself, it executes every other button or every other item in this window in the order in which it's listed. So it's like a cascade of items. You could have like 3 dice rolls in here. Roll a d6, roll a d7, roll a d10. And you click that one button, it rolls all 3 dice and echoes the results to chat. And add high pieces. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you've got a map that's got a lot of details on the image and your counters are covering that information, you can temporarily hide your pieces to read that information off the map and then unhide your pieces. A zoom capability is exactly that. It lets you set a zoom level and some hotkeys, so zooming in, zooming out, etc. Mouse over stack viewer. So you have 5 units in one spot. If you move your mouse over that spot, and the default here is 2 seconds, and you leave your mouse there for 2 seconds, it will then open up a zoom window that'll show you each of those units individually. And you can draw the pieces or not draw the pieces, or use text or not use text. And you can do a zoom factor. So if you want to, you can do it a factor of 3, or you can do it a factor of 0.5, whatever you want. Include non-stacking pieces, show pieces in unrotated state, include top piece in a deck. Normally, you wouldn't mouse over a deck of cards and have it give you a preview window, but if you want to, you can include it in this mouse over stack viewer. Add last move highlighter. It basically draws a line around the last counter that was moved. Add game piece layers. So your map could have a ground combat layer for army units, men, tanks, trucks, cars, that sort of thing. And you'd have a separate layer for air combat, for airplanes, balloons, satellites. And this is where you would put in the 2 labels, ground and air. So let's do that. So you can rotate your layers, reset all layers, mark layer active, and switch between active and inactive. So you can create a set of buttons. And then affect which layers. Use layer names, or I do believe it's going to say or numbers. So that's how you'd build that sort of stuff up. So you could add in additional ones for all of them. Okay, oops. And that was add game layers. Add image capture tool. Pretty self-explanatory. It lets you take a picture of the map, and basically it lets you select the image or use the default image and set your hotkey for it. Add text capture tool. Basically it lets you capture the chat area, and it'll let you capture the names and location information for pieces on the map. Add a deck of cards, and you can create multiple boards and assign the deck of cards specifically to a board. So if we created a community chest board in this deck of cards, we could create the community chest cards, say for instance for a game like Monopoly, and assign this deck of cards to be on that board. And then you get your X and Y position in that board. And then you get some items for how the deck is going to operate. Allow multiple, allow specific. And as you toggle the check marks for things, you'll get additional option lines for them. Draw new cards face up. Always draw new cards face down, in which case, like playing a game of poker, only you, the person that draws it, gets to see it. The card is reversible or not, and then you can assign the command and some other items. Draw outline when empty, you get to specify the color. Send hotkey when empty. Include command to send entire deck to another deck. Can be saved to or loaded from a file. Maximum cards to display in a stack. Perform counting of property expressions. Then you can define what those expressions are. And then restrict adding counters by drag and drop. So, but the only thing here that might be not straightforward is perform counting of property expressions. So let's take a look at the help. Okay, so here's the help on that. Perform counting property expressions. And your expressions must be defined. And then they got some examples. So you can pause the video here and you can read through that information yourself. But basically, you could use this sort of thing to count the suits of a poker deck kind of thing. Hearts, spades, clubs, diamonds. So basically any sort of information about a deck of cards that you might want to count, you can set what those expressions are. So you could count how many cards are face up versus how many cards are face down. You could count how many red cards are on the deck face up, or how many black cards are on the board face up. So basically it lets you count various properties. So that was deck. At start deck is the same thing, except this one is on the board already at the start of a game. And then you got a global key command, and again this is the description, what that command is. You can set matching properties, and this gives you a little insert thing so you can define it by number, string, property, operators, comparisons, logical functions, etc. The best way to understand matching properties is to look at somebody else's module and take a look at some of the ways that they've been set up. Applying to this counters on this map only. Within a deck, apply to all pieces, no pieces, fixed numbers. And you get your button text, your tooltip, and if you want to use an icon, and suppress individual reports or set a report format. So global key commands are basically execution of a key command, and you might have other triggering actions that happen when that key is pressed, sort of thing. Okay, map shading. Basically, it'll allow you to set different colorings on your map. Let's open up the reference manual. And let's scroll down to shading because it has a couple of graphic examples here. Map shading. And it's actually under area of effect. So you could shade areas of your map with that feature, with various radiuses, different shapes, etc. So you can have your shading always on, shade only at the start of a turn, a button text tooltip overlay, an icon, hotkey, and you can specify to all boards, no exclude boards in the list, and then you can define that list, or no only shade boards in the list, or all. And then you got a foreground type and a background type. Draw shade on top of counters, or have the counters be on top of the shading. Your shading pattern percentage, or you could use an image instead of shading. So if you want to tile a bunch of images as the shading, you can use images. You can set the color and the opacity, and then the color of a border, and the thickness of the border. The border's border, I guess you'd call it. So let's take a quick look at the type foreground and background. Okay, so type, if set to background, then the shaded area includes the entire board, minus the areas attached to any area of effect traits. And you can set your area of effect traits on specific counters, kind of thing. If set to foreground, then the shaded area includes only the areas attached to area of effect traits of a particular counter, for instance. So this piece probably has an area of effect of radius 2, and then this one has an area of effect of 2, and then this area is radius 2 of both of them, so it's getting double shaded. So that's the kind of thing you can do with shading. And add recenter pieces button. So if you're, I've seen this happen in a game. It's not intentional, but somehow your counter is no longer directly in a square or in a hex and slightly off kind of thing. You can click this button and it just forces the image to be repositioned where it's supposed to be. So that is everything for this list of items. But now if we actually go in and take a look at maps, you can simply add a board, and I've already added board 1 and board 2. And then when you're on a board, you can then add that board as a hex grid, rectangular, irregular, or multi-zoned. Hex grids are pretty simple to understand. So your hexways go horizontal or vertical. You can do a Y or an X offset to how they're drawn. Your hex height, you might want to make sure this number is a number that can take a square root. if your number isn't a number that can do a square root, then when you're doing a line of sight counting the range, it can suddenly skip ranges. So it'll go range 1, range 2, range 3, range 4, range 6, range 7, range 8, range 9, and then range 11. That sort of thing. And you don't want that to happen when you're counting ranges, so make sure your numbers are squareable. Snap to a defined point, and then you can set in whether or not edges or vertices are defined points that can be snapped to. And you can show the grid or not show the grid, and you can draw center dots. So if I say show grid and then edit the grid, this is a kind of default hex grid. So let's set a grid shape. Let's make pretty big hexes. A little bit malformed, I guess. Let's try that again. There you go. So you got really big hexes. And then you can use your arrow keys to move your grid up and down. And you can do control and arrow keys to size your hexes. And this is moving really slowly, but it is moving really, really slowly. But if you pay close attention, you will see that the hex size is changing. Oh, I guess it's Control Shift to do it fast. Yeah, there we go. So you can change the size of your hex grid. So basically what you do here is you can import an image as the map background, and then you draw the hexes on top of it, and you can resize the hexes, or you can move the hexes up and down to put specific areas of the map within the hex grid. Or if the image you're using already has a hex grid on it, you can use this to match up the hex grid on the hex grid. So if we then go into the hex grid, you can add hex grid numbering. So you get horizontal, and then you get vertical. So this is row 3, that's row 3, that's row 3, that's row 3, that's row 3. So you're counting row 3 horizontal across the screen. Or this is row 3, that's row 3, that's row 3, so you're counting them vertically. Now, of course, the order here, in my mind, is the reverse of what you're actually doing. So here we want the 3s to go vertical, but it's showing as horizontal. And if we go vertical, row 3 is going horizontal. But I guess 0103, 0203, 0303 is going vertical. So I guess this is applying really to the second set of numbers here in the list. But I'm used to maps operating 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. So 1, 2, 3. So it's reversing whether or not it's the first set of digits that are vertical or horizontal. And then you got numerical or alphanumeric, so C, D, and E. For numerical. And then number leading zeros, so let's put 5 leading zeros, or 2 leading zeros, or 1 leading zero, or no leading zeros. And same thing with your horizontal starting number. So here, this is row 0, and that's row 1. And if I put that to a 1, this is row 1, and this is row 2. horizontal numbers are descending or not. Vertical numbering, leading zeros in the vertical. Let's put that to a 5, or 2, or 0, or 1. It lets you change how your numbers are showing. Draw the numbering. Let's give it a rotation, 90 degrees, or upside down. Odd numbered rows numbered together. Anyway, those are your options here, but basically it draws a hex grid with numbers. And if we go into this board, we can do a rectangular board, I guess. We'll just leave this as defaults. And if we do show grid and edit grid, it's a square grid. And then if we go into that, we've got options for add numbering to the grid. And it lets us do the numbering in a similar manner to the hex grid. And of course, you can, in the properties here, set a board image. Let me and you can set your map as reversible or not. So if I go to properties here, it's just the edit grid, and you get the image behind your grid. So you can still see the squares, just kind of barely. If I change the coloring to white, I guess, we go back in, you can see the white squares over the grid. So the image I'm using already has hexes, but they could be any sort of image. Like it could be woods, or mountains, or open water, etc. That's an idea of how you add the graphic to your map. So that's it for map. We did stacking, image, mouse over, global properties. I believe that was pretty much everything covered. So all these options are just the original ones that we pulled up. So now that we've got a hex map created, I just loaded a window and pulled up a hex grid and grabbed the piece, and it's got the area shading effect on it, and we can right click on it and tell it to move forward, rotate it, make it invisible, etc. So as you build your traits in your map, they suddenly start to interact and do things. So that's it for video 5, which should actually have been part of video 2. So hopefully it's been fun and educational for you, and have fun making your own Vassal module.